With about 50% of all chess games ending up in rook endgames, I'd say it's pretty important to know the strategy behind those types of endgames, don't you think? Most rook and pawn versus rook endgames end up in either the Philidor position or the Lucena position. So, it's better to be prepared and to know how to handle yourself in those situations. And trust me, you will find yourself in those situations sooner or later. Let's start right away with the Philidor position. An easy way to remember it is by its other name, the third rank defense. It gets that name because we use our own rook on the third rank to draw the game. Now if you want to draw using a Philidor defense, all you need to do is remember these two golden rules. Number 1, keep your rook on the third rank until the pawn push. And number 2, after the pawn push, bring your rook up to the 8th rank and keep checking the king like your life depends on it. Because it kinda does. Let's start with the most basic example of this position. Here, black has a pawn up in this rook endgame, which he's going to try and promote. Now, in order for this to end in a draw, we need the white king to be on the same file as the black pawn. For example, if the black pawn were on f4, the white king should be on f1, and so on. Now, while learning the move pattern is very important, what's more important here is understanding why this pattern works, and understanding the tactical awareness of this position. Now, we see here that the white king is on the same file as the pawn. So, what's black's plan here to remove the white king from that square in order to promote? If he decides to check with the rook, the king is just going to shuffle himself up and down the board. So, black has to use both his rook and his king to push white's king from that e file. If white manages to stop the black king from joining forces with his rook, the game is going to end in a draw. If not, the game will undoubtedly end in black's favor. This is where the Philidor technique comes into play. And this is the reason for moving the rook to the third rank with rook to b3, the first golden rule of this position. White rook's only purpose is to cut black's king away. Now, what white needs to do is to keep that rook over here on the third file until black decides to push the pawn. Until the pawn move, it doesn't matter what black plays. White is going to remain on that rank no matter what. King to c4, move the rook over here to the other side. Rook to h1, rook to h2, just shuffle the king back and forth. See, here, now black has no way to make any progress. He will push that pawn sooner or later. Now, time to apply that second golden rule. Once the pawn is pushed, white slides his rook to the 8th rank, and it can be any rank up basically, but this is the easiest one. And again, no matter what black plays the next move, white is going to start checking and go after that pawn. If king moves to d3, check. King to e4, check. King to f3, you guessed it, check. Now the black king can't start going after your rook because they'll lose that pawn. King to e4, rook to e8, king f5, and white's going to capture that pawn, drawing the game. If black decides to move further away from the pawn instead, let's say to d4 and c5, the white rook is going to direct its attention to the pawn and play rook to e8. So, the black king has to come back to defend that pawn. You might be asking, what if black decides to defend the pawn with the rook? Alright, leaving the rook to take over the black king's duty of defending that pawn, and allowing the king to go after the white rook. Unfortunately for black, this is also going to end up in a draw because white can use his own king to attack the pawn with two different pieces. If black decides to reinforce the pawn as well, guess what? Check, and again, black can't make any progress. Let's take a quick look at another possible scenario. As we just saw, after the pawn push and the white rook moves up, black can't make any progress at all. But black still has his rook. So what if he decides to use that rook, not for attacking the white king, but for defense? And after the rook to b3 from white, black can respond with rook to h5, preparing to put that rook behind his pawn and defending it that way. The importance of this position, and why you should know it, is because with the correct play, it's a draw no matter what your opponent tries. And no matter which turn to play it is, the position is a draw even if black was to move instead of white. Now, how does white defend this position? It's very simple. We just got to keep those two rules in mind. Keep your rook on the third rank until the pawn push. And rule number 2, you move it to the 8th rank once that pawn starts moving and you start checking the king. So, the rook is going to stay very comfortable here on the third rank. Rook to a3. Pawn moves to e3. And then rook goes up to a8. Now, black's got the idea to defend his pawn by placing the rook on e5. But this doesn't concern white at all. We're going to continue following our rules. we start checking the king, rook to d8. If black plays rook to d5, we could just trade rooks, and we're going to use opposition here to draw the game. King to f1, king to d4, king to e2, king to e4, king to e1, and here it depends on what black is going to play. White needs to put his king on the same file. If black plays f3, white responds with f1. If black plays d3, white responds with d1, and it's going to end up in a draw. It's all pretty simple so far, right? But what if black moves his king behind his own rook? Then white's going to use his own king to target that pawn, king to e2. And no matter what the next move is, white is going to check the king. Now let's move on to Lucena's position, or the bridge. Now this one doesn't exactly have a name as descriptive as the third rank defense, but it still has meaning. The winning principle here is to cut the opponent's king from the promotion square with your rook and shield your pawn from behind, creating a bridge for your own pawn to cross. You're going to understand it more once you see it in action. Let's start once again with the most basic of examples. White is trying to promote his e-pawn, but he got stuck on the promotion square. Again, it's more important to understand the logic behind the moves than to just follow them blindly. So, what's White's plan here? How can he promote this pawn? If he moves his king, the black rook is going to follow him with checks. And if White decides to attack the black rook, they're simply going to capture the pawn after the king releases his defense. So, for this reason, White has to find a defensive resource that's going to protect against the rook check, and that resource is his own rook. Now the most natural defensive resource seems to be rook to e1, protecting that pawn with the rook, allowing the king to chase the black rooks without worrying about defending that pawn. Unfortunately, that's actually not the correct move. Remember, the simplest move might not always be the correct one. So this is why it's important in chess not to rush things and properly think about all the variables. Now after rook to e1, black has this beautiful defense with rook to d2, boxing the white king, leaving him with no available square to move to. All the d-file is controlled by the rook, while the black king controls the f1. So, white has to give a check with rook to g1 to make some room for his own king to allow that promotion, king to h7. And now, if white king tries to come out, the black rook is going to start his checking sequence, leaving him once again with no move that allows him to protect that pawn and also go after the rook. If rook to e1 doesn't work, then what's the correct move in this position? If we had golden rules for the Philidor position, you can believe we have golden rules for the Lucena position as well. One of the golden rules here is you can't build a bridge if your opponent's king is one square closer to the pawn. The king has to be minimum 2 squares away to safely build that bridge. So, in this position, we start by giving a check with rook to g1. The black king can't go to f6 because white can easily promote this way by playing king to f8. And even if the black rook checks on a8, white is still going to sacrifice his pawn to win the game. So with nowhere else to go, the black king has to move to h7. And now, white can start building a bridge with rook to g4. And with that move, the white king can actually come to light. Black cannot check with rook to a8 because of king to f7. And if you're wondering why the black rook can pin the white pawn to the king, well, it's because rook to h4 is checkmate. So, black needs to deal with that first, moving king to h6, pawn promotes, and then it's just a good game. So what if black decides to move his rook to d2, cutting that d-file from the king, forcing him to the f-file? It's not really much of a problem for white here. King to f7, and here black cannot give constant checks to white, because the white rook is going to manage to intervene. Rook moves to f2, king to e6, rook to e2, check. And here, white's got to be careful not to leave that pawn defense and play f5, because the pawn is going to fall the next move. So he needs to play king to f6, and after, rook to f2, check. White can finally play king to e5, and now I hope you can see why we bring our rook there. Because black's check on e2 is now going to be met with rook to e4, creating a bridge for the pawn to safely cross to promotion. Now this is also why it's so important for the black king to be minimum 2 squares away from that pawn, because if he was only 1 square away, he would have been there in time to stop that promotion. Now again, this position is always winning for the attacking party with the correct play, no matter what the sequence of moves your opponent plays. The endgame is honestly the most decisive part of the game, and it requires a certain precision to play. So it's better to know these types of positions inside and out so you can successfully win your hard-fought battles over the chessboard. If you ask me, endgame knowledge is the first thing someone should study when playing chess. A good knowledge of endgames like this really helps shape your middle games and in turn helps shape your openings. So, knowing what you're looking for in an endgame makes a middle game decision much easier. So keep practicing and keep learning. Have a nice day.